Between bad calls and intense rivalries, there's enough to stress about on game day. Keep your mind on the field and off your body odor with Dove Men Plus Care Whole Body Deodorant. Available at Walmart. Dove Men Whole Body Deo provides all-day odor protection from your pits, privates to feed. From pregame analysis to halftime insights to unexpected overtimes, Dove Men Whole Body Deo gives you confidence that lasts all day. Pick it up at your local Walmart.
If your day sounds like
we need the report ASAP,
you deserve Modelo. If you've persevered through
2 more reps, 2 more.
You deserve this ice-cold reward. Modelo, the mark of a fighter. Drink responsibly. Beer imported by Crown Imports, Chicago, Illinois.
This is the story of the one who, as a maintenance specialist for a historic high-rise, knows that vintage charm historically needs constant attention. Which is why when it's time to upgrade turn-of-the-century mechanicals, they turn to Grainger. With easy access to 1 million-plus products and the scale to deliver when and where you need them. The right tools and supplies are never far away. So the one can keep that vintage building running like new. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Nick Stevens. Our co-host Bob Phelan is out again this week. We hope to have him back on here next week. But in the meantime, Nick and I have a lot to break down. Later on this week, we're going to talk about the looming 40-man roster deadline for the Orioles as they try to figure out which players are going to protect from the Major League phase of the Rule 5 draft this offseason. But first, we're going to get into our offseason predictions, as well as rate some moves that were submitted by our listeners, and that will be on tonight's episode. But first, Orioles on the Verge is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, and college basketball, NHL to UFC and MMA. Head to BetOnline today to get on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. Now, we are a couple of weeks into the offseason, and we've had the Orioles make some smaller moves, some of which Nick and I broke down last week, but still a lot of big moves to happen yet in free agency as well as the trade deadline. And Nick, as we look over the predictions we're going to read off tonight, as well as the prompts that we've gotten from our listeners, it's clear that with new ownership in place, the expectations are a lot different this offseason in Birdland.
Yeah, it's, we did that mailbag episode, 2 weeks ago, and that was just kind of like, flying off the cuff there, not really kind of diving into anything. I know I hadn't really looked at anything, and you just kind of assume like free agency, this free agent class, not that very deep, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But then when you really dive in and start to think about this, and I like you said, the optimism and hope of new ownership, big spending, you saw what this team did at the trade deadline last year. That was inspiring to me, trading away the number of prospects that they did to help improve the Major League roster. I just feel like the options truly are limitless this offseason. And it's like weird because I was thinking about this earlier today. We're only like 3 months away or so from our 5th anniversary of doing the show. This is probably the first offseason where we can get on here and be like, what's your bold prediction for the Orioles this offseason? And it's not like, I don't know, let's get frisky and sign Nathan Eovaldi. Like, I want to sign Nathan Eovaldi, but like that's just kind of like that's a secondary move now for the Orioles. So it's fun to sit there and think about, but it's also kind of frustrating when I know for me when I'm trying to sit down and like actually organize some thoughts to these questions and everything, and who I'd like the Orioles to go after. But it's freeing to kind of look at the entire list, look at the entire league, and be like, who do we want? We can go get them. And it's a real possibility that they could get that person. So it's kind of cool.
And let's start with, I think, the biggest question facing the Orioles, certainly one of the biggest questions facing the Orioles this offseason, which is Corbin Burnes. He is currently a free agent. Are the Orioles going to bring him back? That will be our first prompt here. And Nick, what do you think?
seen a lot of predictions of him going to the Mets. I don't know. I feel like the Mets are going to be big spenders, obviously, and land a couple of big names, but I don't know. Like David Stearns is there. What's that relationship like between Burnes and David Stearns after what happened in Milwaukee? I don't know. Are they good? Was Stearns heavily involved there and there's still some animosity? I don't know. I don't think it's going to be the Mets, though. I think it's boring to say the Dodgers. Honestly, I'm going to start off this one. I hate starting this off with, the Orioles podcast says he's going to come back to the Orioles. But let's test it. Let's see if ownership puts their money where their mouth is. I'm going to start this off by saying Corbin Burnes is an Oriole in 2025.
I'll follow the consensus and say that he does go to the Mets. I think that Juan Soto is kind of the first domino to fall for the top tier of free agents, and that after losing out on Soto, the Mets pivot to Burnes. I actually think for a number of reasons, the Giants make the most sense for Burnes as a landing spot. I think that that's a place as he gets into his later 30s, a good ballpark for him to pitch in, an organization that has some success with veteran pitchers, but the Mets feel closer than the Giants do to the point where they could sign Burnes and be a World Series favorite, and I don't see the Giants in that position.
No. What about Santander? Where does Santander play on opening day 2025?
I've had a lot of back and forth about this. I have made the case for the Orioles to keep Santander, and if you've not listened to that show yet, go back to the episode that Bob, Nick, and I did towards the end of the Orioles season. Here are our thoughts on that. I think Santander is ultimately going to sign elsewhere, and I think that elsewhere, I'm going out on a limb and saying Detroit Tigers. Good year for them, but a lot of young players with question marks in that lineup. They need a veteran bat to solidify things. I think he makes a lot of sense there, and yeah, they have that albatross that is Javier Baez's contract on the books, but they've shown a willingness to spend before. There's not a ton of salary obligations, I think, beyond that. So I think Santander goes to the Tigers.
So between these first two, I hope my internet's good. I think my internet's freaking out. I thought I was you there for a second. I'm feeling less and less optimistic about Santander returning to Baltimore. I'm actually, between the two, I feel more optimistic about Burnes returning than I do Santander at this point. And I've been very much on the Santander train, bringing him back at pretty much all cost for a while now. But I think, like many former Orioles, I think the San Francisco Giants are a good fit. You look at Fangraphs right now, and their outfield is like Jung-Hoo Lee, who missed all of his first season here in the States with an injury. Yastrzemski's 34 and average. I have no idea who Grant McCrary is, to be completely honest. Helio Ramos, I don't know anything about his defense. Good young hitter for sure. That lineup could use some home run power, and I know it's already hard enough to hit home runs out there in San Francisco, but they could use some pop in that lineup, especially they moved on from Jorge Soler last year. But then there's also the reports recently in the last couple of days of like the Giants, not being big spenders. Seen a lot of Willy Adames ties to San Francisco. I think Santander would fit out there, and it's mostly me not wanting him to be a Yankee or a National, which is where I figure he probably will end up, and that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt real bad. So my San Francisco prediction is just kind of more so me, I think, kind of protecting myself. But yeah, I'll stick with the Giants. Why not?
We'll go to this one now, and this is how far we've come as an organization. Remember the non-tender deadline used to be a whole episode on this show, and now it's going to be like a 90-second discussion and a longer episode. Will any Orioles be non-tendered this offseason? They got a lot of arbitration-eligible players, but seemingly not that many on the chopping block with this decision.
No, maybe Emmanuel Rivera probably. Like I don't think. I guess the better question would be like, do we see any surprises here with this list? I don't think I see any surprises on the non-tender list. I think isn't Matt Bowman already gone? I think he already elected free agency. Either way, yeah, I don't see any surprises here. I think everybody is either returns, whether or not all these guys make it to the offseason on the roster is a different story. But yeah, I'd say probably Rivera is the only one I could see.
Yeah, Rivera is the only one I see as well. I think everyone is tendered a contract. Again, there's possibility that we see one or two traded, but I think that if they are traded, it's going to be for baseball reasons and not for salary reasons.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I feel like we're going to dive into these Mountcastle specifically a little bit more later on, but will both Ryan Mountcastle and Cedric Mullins remain on the roster throughout the offseason? There was the rumors of them being dangled at the deadline last year. Obviously, lots of Ryan Mountcastle trade talk already this offseason, but do both of these guys remain on the roster throughout the offseason and start on opening day for the Orioles?
Yes on Mullins and no on Mountcastle. I'll start with Mullins, which is that the Orioles still don't have that in-house replacement lined up yet. And if you're going to move on from Mullins this offseason, you've got a lot of things you got to consider, despite him having pretty much a down year offensively, although he had a nice uptick there at the end. You've got to replace that defense. You've got to replace the speed. There's a lot of center field depth in this organization, but I don't think out of that group with Judd Fabian, Vance Honeycutt, and Enrique Bradfield that anybody is going to be in the major leagues, at least for substantial part of 2025. All of those guys are at least a year away. So I think that Mullins is back, and he's going to look to do what Anthony Santander did and put up good numbers in a contract here. Mountcastle, I don't think will be back. I think that the Orioles will dangle him out there in a trade because first base is a position that they can upgrade. And Mountcastle, while his value is not tremendously high, can get you something back in return because he's young. He's got a few years of team control left, and there's reasons to believe that if you take him out of Camden Yards, that power will come around.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree there with this question as well. Again, we've talked about Mountcastle a lot. We'll talk about him more here. I'm very much on the move on from Ryan Mountcastle train. And, not move on just to move on, but I do think this is an area that you can upgrade the roster, even if it's marginally at first base. But I think Ryan Mountcastle can definitely help you upgrade other positions. I'm more so looking at like the bullpen. I'm very much on if you can move on from Ryan Mountcastle in a deal for, if it's Houston, the talks of, I know MLB Trade Rumors article talked about the Astros needing to get creative with their finances this offseason and moving on potentially from Ryan Presley. Like it's a move like that. I know there was somebody had asked the question, and it was like a Fangraphs or there you go. The Mountcastle for Bednar swap. I think someone asked that in like a Fangraphs chat or an MLB Trade Rumors chat. I'm down for that as well. Like I think if you can move Ryan Mountcastle for a bullpen piece, maybe one of these guys where you have to take on a bigger contract, but a proven, steady, reliable reliever. See you later. Thank you for your services. But again, we don't need to move on from him just to move on from him. Mullins, I see no reason to move on from Mullins right now. I'm not extending Mullins, to be honest, but like next year, he's an Oriole. He's 30. He's not dead. He's only 30. The speed still plays on the base paths. He's going to give you strong defensive value out there in center field. You could probably move Cowser over in center field, but like there's no need to. There's no need to rock that boat. You listen to good offers on Mullins. You think about it because he only has 1 year left on his contract. But yeah, I'd say my guess is Mountcastle is gone, but Mullins definitely stays.
And we'll have a lot more Mountcastle talk later on in this episode. So we're not finished with that subject just yet. But I'm going to go with something else on the roster now, which is who will the Orioles acquire or re-sign to be their backup catcher?
I'm still going to bet it's McCann, and I wouldn't hate it. We talked about that recently. Talked about specifically about his offensive production, especially in the second half of the season, how that was actually really, really solid. You look at free agency, the options are kind of thinning already. Travis d'Arnaud went to the Angels, Austin Hedges. He go back to Cleveland. I don't know where he went, but he's off the market. Looking at the free agent list, if it's not going to be McCann, I imagine the competition is going to be pretty tough for this guy, and he may want more than the Orioles are probably going to want to dish out. But if you can get Carson Kelly, I like it. 99 WRC plus last season, a little bit of pop, low strikeout rate, but much better defensively than McCann. Obviously good at blocking pitches in the dirt, controls the run game, a really solid framer. Again, that might be maybe a little too pricey that the Orioles want to go for the backup catcher when they know who McCann is. I'm sure that leadership in the clubhouse, take that for what you will. I'm sure it means a lot to a lot of the guys in that clubhouse. So I'm not going to hate McCann coming back at all. But if you're looking at other free agents, I like the Carson Kelly idea.
Yeah, I know Carson Kelly is a name that some people brought up. Danny Jansen's another one where maybe that's an upgrade over McCann. Ultimately, I think McCann comes back for a couple of reasons, which is that if you're a fringes backup catcher, Baltimore is not the best place for you to come because you have Adley Rutschman in front of you. And unless the Orioles are going to reduce Adley's workload this coming season, you know you're not going to get a lot of opportunities to play. And with that in mind, McCann fits the backup to Adley Rutschman role very well because you can put him in situations that maybe don't favor Adley either because McCann is better at controlling a running game, or you can put him in there against lefties. I don't, would he be my first choice for backup catcher? No. But I think that he is fine in that role. And for anyone who's maybe a little bit concerned about how having McCann back there could affect the Orioles, the thing that I would point to is that while Adley Rutschman was not hurt in the sense that he was on the IL in the second half of this season, he was clearly not the same player. James McCann was your backup, and maybe McCann didn't add a lot of value to the team, but he managed to help them stay afloat, and he's not the reason that they didn't play well in the second half. You can chalk it up to any number of things that have nothing to do with who the backup catcher was.
Yeah, I don't totally hate Rene Pinto, who they just picked up off waivers from Tampa Bay. I doubt he survives the offseason. He's really not the defensive upgrade I'm sure a lot of people would probably prefer to have to back up Adley. But I mean, you talk about a guy who hits the ball incredibly hard. Pinto is an intriguing option. He's there right now. But yeah, I'm fine if James McCann comes back. What else do we have here? I lost the spot. How will the Orioles acquire starting pitching this offseason? So I think I want to get into this a little bit more in more detail with specific names later on. But are we trading, free agency, both? How are we getting starting pitching help this offseason?
I think it's going to come in the form of both. I expect the big move will be in the form of a trade because the Orioles still have the prospect depth to go out and make that kind of move. Not to mention that I think the trade market is really going to be set after Corbin Burnes and Blake Snell sign. You could throw Max Fried in there too, but once those guys sign, then you're going to really see the trade market start to take shape. For reasons we've discussed before, I think a move with the Mariners to trade for Luis Castillo makes a lot of sense, but there are other starters out there who might not be at the same level as Corbin Burnes, but still a guy that you would feel very comfortable penciling in as your number one starter. And then I think that they're going to try to at least have an option for the last two spots brought in through free agency. In an ideal world, you have Nathan Eovaldi in there, along with a starting pitcher that's at the top of your rotation. But I'll bring the expectations down a little bit to say that I think it'll be someone who will compete with Cade Povich, Dean Kramer, Trevor Rogers for the last two spots in that rotation.
At least this year, I think there are if you trade for the ace or you sign Max Fried or Blake Snell, however you get your ace, get your ace. But I do think, I agree, it's going to be both. I think we're going to see a pretty substantial trade, at least one. And I do think they go huge with at least one big free agent signing. But at least if you're talking about bringing in starting pitchers to compete in the back end spots, at least I think there are, and again, we'll get into specific names, there are more guys like the Walker Buehler types available this offseason. I think there are still some super intriguing arms like him who fit that mold, who have what I think is some pretty high upside. They're risky, but they have some pretty high upside that at least this year we're not like, oh great, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel for guys to bring in to be the 4 or 5 starter. I think there are some legitimate options this year that the Orioles could be on at least.
Between bad calls and intense rivalries, there's enough to stress about on game day. Keep your mind on the field and off your body odor with Dove Men Plus Care Whole Body Deodorant. Available at Walmart. Dove Men Whole Body Deo provides all-day odor protection from your pits, privates to feed. From pregame analysis to halftime insights to unexpected overtimes, Dove Men Whole Body Deo gives you confidence that lasts all day. Pick it up at your local Walmart.
Go to this one now. Will the Orioles sign anyone to an extension this offseason?
I don't think it's going to be Gunnar. I don't think he signs yet for many obvious reasons. Adley, I don't even know if the Orioles are interested in extending Adley. I don't even know if that's the right decision to extend Adley at this point. Again, I'm not extending Mullins. We've talked about how cool it would be if Samuel Basayo got that extension, but I don't think the Orioles go that route either. I'm going to say no, but if they do, other than the obvious extension candidates, if they do, I wouldn't mind seeing like a Zach Eflin extension. He's only 30. He was so good for you last year. I think he's going to be an integral part of the rotation again this year. I wouldn't mind tacking on another year or two to his contract and keeping him around for a little bit longer.
I ultimately lean no on this question, but I agree with you that there is a possibility you see a player like Eflin have a year or two added on to his contract. We're in a weird spot with the Orioles where last year it was the timing is right to sign Adley Rutschman, but does ownership have the money or want to give up the money to extend Adley? Now you have an ownership group that has the money to do it, but now the question is, does the timing make sense for anybody involved? Because if you're Adley, you're not going to be negotiating from a position of strength after last year. And then if you're the Orioles, you have to look at Adley Rutschman's dip in the second half and figure out, okay, does that present any long-term concerns? What is the risk of signing a catcher past the age of 30, which is what you would be doing with an extension for Rutschman? I would love to see Gunnar Henderson extended, but I agree with you. It's not going to happen because Gunnar has no reason to sign an extension right now. The one under the radar possibility that I go back and forth with, if you want a bigger ticket extension, is Jordan Westburg. It would be odd for a Boris client to sign an extension before arbitration eligibility, but Westburg's value is pretty high. Coming off an all-star appearance, he seems to be establishing himself as sort of a leader, or at least a leader by example in the Orioles clubhouse. Maybe there's a feeling that it's a good fit for him and the timing is right from a money standpoint. But I still would be surprised if he does that before he hits arbitration, which is not going to happen until after next season.
Yeah, so many of these guys, they're just so young. And the Westburg thing is, I thought about Westburg as well. And it's just so interesting because, I mean, 2 years ago, a year or so ago, we're hearing that, he's potentially being moved in a trade. And Orioles like shopping him around, or teams are certainly calling about him. And here we are now where I think considered by pretty much most Orioles fans, Westburg is kind of like that solid rock on this roster in that lineup defensively. It's an interesting choice there with Westburg. 2 more predictions here before we get into a bunch of these hypothetical moves. Some of these are really fun that patrons submitted, some we came up with as well, but let's go bold. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, this year, I think bold prediction for the Orioles means something a little bit different with all the hope and optimism. But what's your bold Orioles prediction for this offseason?
I covered half of it by giving my starting pitcher prediction, but I'm going to go on and say that the Orioles get 2 big-ticket acquisitions for their pitching staff and 2 big-ticket acquisitions for the lineup. First of all, I don't necessarily think that's an either-or situation with Anthony Santander and Teoscar Hernandez. I think you could find room for both, and if the Orioles really wanted to, they could. But even if it's not those 2 players exactly, let's say it's them and someone else, or It's two hitters we're not even thinking of right now. I would not be at all surprised if the Orioles go out and get a right fielder. They get someone that can move between the first base and DH spots, and then that could free them up to put Heston Kjerstad out there in a trade, put Ryan O'Hearn into more of a strict platoon role, and give them an opportunity to ease Kobe Mayo in, whether that's with partial playing time in the major leagues early in the year or another month down in Norfolk to refine himself at the plate and play first base a little bit more. That gives them an opportunity to ease him in a way that they really couldn't when they brought him up last year. And I'll admit that when I think about this, I don't have a lot of specific names in mind beyond Santander and Hernandez. But I wouldn't be shocked if the Orioles go out and trade market, or they bring in a guy like Tyler O'Neill, or they take a chance on someone like Mark Canha and hope that his numbers rebound a little bit. But I think you're going to see two major moves to bolster the lineup, and you're going to see two major moves to bolster the pitching staff, along with some depth moves targeted at the bullpen and second base.
Just to throw it out there, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being they sign him, 1 being they don't. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you feel like that bold move is a Juan Soto? The Orioles are the surprise team, and it's Soto.
A 3.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I land, because I wouldn't rule it out entirely. And I think that if you're Soto, there's a lot of reasons that are appealing to play here. A competitive young core around you, a great ballpark to hit in, a short right field. I mean, it's kind of what he has at Yankee Stadium without the mystique or whatever mythical thing Yankees fans are clinging to these days of being a Yankee. But you would still have a really talented young core around you. Short right field, great ballpark to hit in. At the end of the day, though, does he leave New York other than to go play for the Dodgers? I don't think so.
Yeah, I was going to say I was probably at like a 2 on that one. So I'm pretty sure last year my bold prediction was the Orioles signed Blake Snell, and now it really does feel like that's a real possibility, which is fun. Even Max Fried could be a possibility. So you can't say Blake Snell or Max Fried anymore as being bold. I don't know how bold this is, but I'm going to say that I'll say Framber Valdez is a Baltimore Oriole to begin the season. The Orioles were there. Michael Elias was there. Kobe Perez was there. Eve Rosenbaum was there in the Houston's international department for a period there. I think Eve specifically might have been a year or two after they signed Framber, but he was in the organization. So if they are fans of Framber, I don't see why they wouldn't be, but if they're fans of his, I think he could be a potential target. He's a lefty who already does a great job of keeping the ball on the ground. He's got 2 years of control left, not a free agent until after 2026. I think there were some elbow issues this year. Who didn't have elbow or shoulder issues last year, but he still logged 170 innings with a sub-3 ERA. The issue is, if I'm Houston, I don't see why they would move Framber or Kyle Tucker. I've seen some things about that. I don't see why you move any of those big ticket items you have when you're in the same division as the Angels and the A's and even the Mariners. I don't think the Mariners have a very fun offseason. I don't know. Just listening to a lot of Mariners content, I think they're squarely setting themselves up for a pretty disappointing offseason. And it already sounds like they're going to be kind of frugal financially, even though I don't think they really need to be. Either way, we're not a Mariners podcast. If I'm Houston, I have a hard time seeing them move some of those big ticket items until at least the deadline, kind of see where the season takes them, because I think they could fairly easily win the West. But maybe they could also, if they're trying to shed salary, I don't know what Framber's salary is or how much that would help, but they could also say, hey, we have a potential trade here with the Orioles where we're able to move Framber, acquire some major league pieces, and still remain competitive in this division, get into the playoffs and see what happens. While also looking ahead to the future in a win-win situation. But yeah, I would not mind having Framber as the one of the top flight starters here in Baltimore.
I would really like that. I'll throw this out there real quick before I go to the next prediction. You get one of these two lefties who were with the Astros at the end of last year, Framber Valdez and a trader, Yusei Kikuchi, free agency. Who are you taking?
That's a tough one because I have some stuff on Kikuchi that I jotted down here that I really want Kikuchi in free agency. Considering the fact that you would have to trade for Framber, who has 2 years of control left, and the fact that Kikuchi is a free agent right now, I'd say Kikuchi.
Yeah, that's kind of where I lean to, but I would be happy with either one. What is your bold league-wide prediction? So the other 29 teams, what is your bold prediction of what's going to happen this offseason?
Let's see. I don't know. I kept looking at Detroit. I think last year I said like the White Sox win the offseason. That was dumb. But I'm gonna stick in the Central, and I want to say Detroit. Again, I don't know how bold this is either after that late season run, getting into the playoffs, even though like everything had to go right for Detroit and everything had to go wrong for like the rest of the league. And it all did. It was a perfect storm for the Tigers get into the postseason there. But I don't know. I feel like they ride that momentum and have a massive offseason. Like you lock down one of your stars. They got a lot of young, really good talent on that roster. That's not Spencer Torkelson. They still got a lot of really awesome young pieces on that roster. They lock one of those guys down at least, and they go out and they land one of the big fish. They land a Pete Alonso, or they land a Christian Walker, or maybe they don't go after a Burnes, Snell, or Fried, that top tier, but they get out here quickly in the next couple of days or couple of weeks and maybe even set the market with one of those second tier guys that's led by that Kikuchi, Pivetta, Evaldi tier. I don't know. I could see the Tigers maybe trying to get out in front of Kansas City and establish themselves as the clear-cut favorites in the Central going into next year.
That's a good one. I hedge with this one a little bit because I don't know exactly what their payroll situation is, but I think the Reds are going to have a really busy offseason. I don't think they brought in Terry Francona to stand pat with the current roster that they have, which is better than what their record last year suggested. I think that they had a little bit of bad luck with some injuries and maybe underperformed compared to expectations. But there's a lot of young talent there. And despite the fact that they play in one of the most hitter-friendly ballparks in baseball, arguably the most hitter-friendly, they've done a good job of bringing pitchers in over the years and having them have success. You look at Sonny Gray being one example that was pretty recent. So I think that they could go out and get at least a second-tier starter, have that guy pitch well, and make some other moves to really solidify this roster. So maybe they don't get, they're not going to go sign Juan Soto. Maybe they'll go get Corbin Burnes. But I think when you look at everybody's moves at the end of the offseason, you're going to realize that the Reds did a lot to improve their roster, and they'll go into the season being one of the favorites in a fairly deep division, albeit one that lacks a dominant team.
I like it. They were destroyed by injuries last year. They also have a very young, fun lineup, and that pitching staff. I mean, they continue to draft the high ceiling arms. You got your Hunter Greens, Nick Lodolo is back healthy. They've hit the draft hard. Rhett Lauder came up in the big leagues his first year as a pro and was successful in that first stint. Yeah, if the Reds injury variance bounces back in their favor and they're aggressive this offseason, the Reds could be a force out there in the National League.
We'll go into our hypothetical moves now. And as Nick mentioned earlier, these were submitted by our listeners. We got a lot through our Discord chat, but then also some through email and a few other places. And we have a lot of hypothetical moves concerning some names that the Orioles have been attached to in the early stages of this offseason, guys like Anthony Santander, Corbin Burnes, Max Fried, Teoscar Hernandez. So we took the liberty here of kind of combining those into one larger question. I'll let Nick take that one to start us off.
Yeah, a lot of the big chunk here was, let's see, we got Ben H. who asked Teoscar Hernandez at 3 years, $75 million, and Max Fried at 6/170. The Bird is the Word said Burnes at 6/225. Brady Jones and Max Fried at 390, 3 years, $90 million plus a player option. And so I guess we can just talk about all those guys here. And then Mark via email, shout out to Mark sending the email in. Email address, I forget what it is. Look on our Twitter page. It's there. The Verge BSL podcast at gmail.com, I believe. Email us there as well. He sent in a question and says, you have the power to sign one of these tandems. The tandem you don't pick go to other teams. Who do you choose? And that tandem is Corbin Burnes and Max Fried, or Teoscar Hernandez and Anthony Santander. Again, who would we choose? And he also asked, who do we think Mike Elias would choose in this hypothetical? So I don't know how we want to attack this and everybody else's options, but maybe Mark's question first on which tandem do you choose there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If I had to choose between those two tandems, I would probably go with the Santander Hernandez tandem, because you're not committing as much in years as you would to Burnes and Fried. And you still have the depth left over to go out and get your big ticket starter and sign someone in free agency, or maybe pull off a trade for someone like Framber Valdez plus a second deal to go get a starter. But the point is that having Hernandez and Santander around allows you to dip into your position player core a little bit in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you signed Burnes and Fried. Not to mention that combined could be anywhere from 9 to 12 years for those guys, maybe more. Whereas Santander, I know there's been a wide range of predictions for him. I think there's been some as high as 7 years. That seems like a long shot to me. I think it's probably 3 or 4 years for him, 3 or 4 years for Hernandez.
So my initial gut reaction when I read the question was easy. It's Santander and Teoscar Hernandez. I don't care if there's room for both of them or not. Figure it out. Figure out how to get both those bats in the lineup. You can do it. I believe in you. And I love Santander, and I love the veteran presence of Teoscar Hernandez, the reliability there. Orioles obviously want a right-handed hitting bat in that lineup. Teoscar fits that bill. Go for that one. And like you mentioned, there's more than enough to go out and trade for your ace. Again, like they did with Corbin Burnes. There's enough in that second tier of starting pitchers that we've talked about so many times to go off and sign that I would be perfectly fine with adding, 2 of those guys. But I don't know. I thought about it more, and I'm going the opposite, and I'm going to say I'm taking Corbin Burnes and Max Fried. I'm just lay it on the table, just bully the rest of the league with your starters, and give me the Burnes, Max Fried, Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez. Pick your number 5. Dean Kramer, I guess for now, your number 5. That way, I almost feel like you could, if you went with Burnes and Fried, you could upgrade the lineup. I feel like it would cost you less, maybe. Maybe I'm wrong. But I feel like it would maybe cost you less to go out and continue to upgrade the lineup than it would if you brought in Santander and Teoscar Hernandez and then tried to upgrade the pitching staff in a meaningful way. I feel like in terms like prospect capital and such, you're going to be spending more. So I think that played a role into my decision as well. I don't know, but yeah, I'm going with the 2 pitchers, but I also love pitching. I love pitchers duels. So I'm more inclined to go the pitcher route with those 2 guys. But who do we think Mike Elias would choose in that scenario?
I think he would choose the hitters. I go back and forth on that one, but I think he would choose the hitters.
Yeah, no doubt. But so what do we want to do with the rest of these? I guess maybe. I don't know, so
let's. Right. Oh, go ahead.
I was just looking how to attack the rest of this. I don't like Teoscar Hernandez, the 3 for 75, and Max Fried. Obviously. Yeah, I don't think we're going to say no to Teoscar Hernandez and Max Fried coming in. We're not going to say no to Corbin Burnes, and we're certainly not going to say, even if it's just Max Fried, to Brady Jones's scenario there. What I was kind of thinking about is like, is it Teoscar Hernandez, or let's say Santander is gone in this scenario. Do you want Teoscar Hernandez for one of these deals that was proposed, or is there someone else you're looking to fill that void out in right field? Or are you sliding Heston Kjerstad into that spot?
I'm going with Hernandez. And I know that, John Mioli brought up a good point in the banner this week that when you look at Hernandez's walk rate, you're not looking at a player that's substantially different from Santander. And I think a lot of the same concerns about how Santander is going to hold up over the length of a 3 or 4 year deal apply to Hernandez. But to me, when I look at Hernandez, I just feel, and maybe it's because I've seen Santander day in and day out for the last several years, but it seems like you don't get those peaks and valleys to the extremes that you do with Santander. And you look at the playoff experience that Hernandez has racked up, especially with the Dodgers this past year, and I think that that's really big. And yeah, the defense isn't great, but he can play right field at Camden Yards. There's no question about that. And I know that there are a lot of concerns about how his bat would play at Camden Yards, and his numbers in Seattle 2 seasons ago weren't great. But Seattle is a really tough place to hit, and when you dig a little bit deeper into that quote-unquote down year, you realize it really wasn't that bad, and he rebounded from it pretty nicely this past year. So if Santander is gone, Hernandez, for me, is the top target.
I'm gonna give my love to Tyler O'Neill here and say Teoscar Hernandez is a popular pick. Not gonna hate it at all. Sure, bring me Teoscar Hernandez and Max Fried tomorrow. Even if those are the only 2 moves, I'm more than satisfied. But just to throw it out there for discussion's sake, there's just not a lot out there in right field. Again, assuming Santander is gone, and you look at the rest of the outfield class, it's Soto, Santander, Teoscar Hernandez, and Tyler O'Neill. And I could see Teoscar probably staying in LA. Soto, I agree with you. I don't think he's going to leave the state of New York. Santander probably is a national at this point. I think Tyler O'Neill's that last big ticket. Like I think Jurickson Profar is going to make some team massively regret signing him. I'm not interested at all in Alex Verdugo. If you are an Orioles fan who wants Alex Verdugo, we need to think about that a little bit more. Like Jesse Winker, like if you think what he did for the Mets in the playoff run and with the Nationals before that, if it's for real, maybe it is. But again, that's a left-handed bat. I just don't see anything else. Maybe you can pray Heston Kjerstad makes the breakout next year and you bring in Mark Canha, who can play first base, outfield. We talked about that a lot. I like that as well. But I mean, Tyler O'Neill, I really like this idea as well. Kind of like shoot for the moon. If you're not going to land Teoscar Hernandez and Santander is gone, I'm big on O'Neill just because there's a lot to dig in there with O'Neill. But one being the health, and he's played 7 years in the big leagues. If you take away 2020, so 6 seasons, only 2 of those 6 seasons he's played 100 plus games. But when he was healthy, 2021 with St. Louis, he played 138 games. He was top 10 in MVP voting, 34 home runs, 5 WAR player. And then this year in Boston, he played 113 games, 31 home runs, career high walk rate, 11%, 131 WRC plus. Really solid season. He was in the 87th percentile in walks, but he did strike out more than 33% of the time, which was the 2nd percentile. So that's not good at all. But he hits the ball incredibly hard. It's risky, but I think if it pays off in a pretty tremendous way. As long as he stays healthy, I think you got a pretty big bet there. I know playing in Boston, you can question some of his statistics last year in Boston and how legit are they. But I'm more and more on board for give me Tyler O'Neill to play in this outfield.
I definitely think that you're going to see O'Neill's name pop up, especially if Santander goes, because of what he can do when he's healthy. So that's someone to keep an eye on. I'm going to go to my own hypothetical move here. The Orioles acquired Jordan Montgomery from the Diamondbacks in a salary dump. Now, although Bob is not with us tonight, he did help us out by researching these trades through the trade simulator. And what that came up with was that Montgomery's value after his horrendous 2024 season stands at minus 10.5. And it was a weird year for Montgomery for a lot of reasons, but he's now going to be back in Arizona where the Diamondbacks owner has more or less said that they don't want him anymore after opting into a $22.5 million salary for 2025. He's 32, coming off a bad year, but you go back to this time last year, there were a lot of Orioles fans clamoring for the Orioles to sign Montgomery, and for good reason. He had a lot of regular season success, coming off a good postseason run with the Rangers that helped get them to a World Series title. Now, the Orioles could practically have him for a waiver claim albeit an expensive one. Nick, would you take Jordan Montgomery in a salary dump?
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Between bad calls and intense rivalries, there's enough to stress about on game day. Keep your mind on the field and off your body odor with Dove Men Plus Care Whole Body Deodorant. Available at Walmart. Dove Men Whole Body Deo provides all-day odor protection from your pits, privates to feed. From pregame analysis to halftime insights to unexpected overtimes, Dove Men Whole Body Deo gives you confidence that lasts all day. Pick it up at your local Walmart.
Build up to Black Friday with savings all month long at Lowe's. Get up to 50% off select major appliances, plus take an additional 10% off when you buy select major appliances. And don't wait to pick up holiday inflatables under $20. Don't wait to save, in-store or online now, because Lowe's knows deals. Valid 11/6 through 12/4. Cannot be combined with additional discounts. See Lowe's.com for details and qualifying items while supplies last.
With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows the resourceful individual to earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth for just $5 a month. The new gold standard is here. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC.
I want to believe that Montgomery could have a lot of success in Baltimore. I think he would. He's a lefty who doesn't rack up the strikeouts, but he's got a good defense behind him. I don't know. We saw Montgomery and Snell both struggle at the beginning of last year. Once they finally got on the mound, Snell figured it out. Montgomery did not. Like you said, ownership in Arizona has already trashed him, and he's like, thank you for the $22 million. I'll be sticking around. I love that. Kind of shove it to the organization. Maybe putting this year behind him, starting fresh with a new organization, especially one like Baltimore, could set him up for success. I think if this was, last year, if this was 2 years ago, I would say absolutely. Let's make this trade tomorrow. How can we get this done? But I'm going to pass. I don't know. And you look at his baseball savant numbers, the fastball run value was in the 3rd percentile. Off-speed run value was in the 1st percentile. Dreadful last year. Let's take Steamer projections for what they are. Steamer projections are already out for next year. They have him as a 1 F4 pitcher next year. So Steamer doesn't like him to bounce back. I don't know. I think if, again, like I mentioned earlier, if you're looking for a guy like this, I want higher ceiling guy. I want Walker Buehler. Even Matt Boyd, like I would almost even prefer to take the gamble on Matt Boyd, hope he stays healthy. Shane Bieber coming off Tommy John surgery, give me that all day. I want the higher upside guys other than Montgomery, which I just don't feel like the upside's there.
Yeah, when I first wrote up this question, I kind of thought that I was leaning towards saying yes, but I'm actually going to say no to my own question because, like you said, if you're going to take a flyer, you might as well take a flyer on the free agent market, and you can do it for a lot less money. And I know that we're in this, new era with ownership here, but $22.5 million is still $22.5 million. And you know that there's going to be some constraints somewhere along the line. I would almost rather wait it out and see if you can get a lefty or just any starter on the free agent market close to spring training that can come back to Baltimore and have a nice rebound, or, Arizona pays down a little bit more of that salary in the regular season. If he's even average around the trade deadline, you go out and you get him if you want him. But I don't think you need to bring him in now at that price.
No. Yeah, I think I'm out. I do want all the lefties though. I don't. You talk about Evaldi a lot. Sure, would love to have it. Playoff guy, but I want all the lefties. I just don't know if I want Jordan Montgomery lefty. You want to go to? I like Yoni's here, and I had an answer for Yoni's. Yoni is suggesting Paul Goldschmidt 1 year, $13 million. I think the price is fair. I think it's 1 year deals from here on out for Goldschmidt. I want to hear what you have to say first about Goldschmidt. Would you want the Orioles to bring him in on that kind of deal?
I went back and forth on this, and ultimately the answer is no, because I have about as much confidence in Paul Goldschmidt bouncing back next year in an Orioles uniform as I do in Ryan Mountcastle returning next year and hitting somewhere in the range of 25 to 30 homers. And you look at Paul Goldschmidt's Baseball Savant page from last year, and it's kind of a mixed bag because on one hand, hard hit rate stayed pretty good. Barrel percentage wasn't too bad, but everything else seemed like it took a step backwards. And he is 37, so you just have to feel like maybe we're kind of seeing the end here. Not to say that he's not a good fit on a 1 year deal somewhere, but you bring him into this ballpark as clearly everything behind his power numbers is taking a step backwards. And I just don't think it's a good fit.
Yeah, I will say, I know I was reading Brendan Tuma at Too Much Tuma on Twitter. He's got a Substack. He's head of MLB info for Underdog Fantasy. I think he's in our Discord as well, if you want to reach out to him there. But he recently wrote about Goldschmidt, and I was reading through that earlier today, and he talked about a lot of what you just mentioned there. More whiffs as well, way less walks. I think it's a career low walk rate by a mile, and I also think it's a career high strikeout rate. But across the board, fastballs, off speed, breaking balls, all of it, more whiffs. But as far as like doing damage on contact, that remained pretty steady. And so he was making maybe less contact, but when he was making that contact, it's still good contact. And he's also, like you said, 37 years old, doesn't have the fastest sprint speed in the world as a 37-year-old first baseman, but he also still had double-digit stolen bases this year. He's a smart base stealer. I also agree that I'm not buying a huge bounce back for him, but my thought was instantly no, because the point you made exactly was my point. And that this is the whole, we don't need to move Ryan Mountcastle just to move him. If you're gonna move Ryan Mountcastle because you want to bring in Christian Walker or somebody, absolutely. But to replace him with Paul Goldschmidt, you better get a really good pitcher or somebody else in return for Mountcastle. Because I would just rather keep riding the Ryan Mountcastle wave there. Honestly, my thing with first base also was I'm on the Carlos Santana train. I've been thinking about that a lot, and I really like the Carlos Santana deal. Yeah, he's even older, but he's still popping off 20-plus home runs a year. He mashes lefties. He was a 161 WRC plus against the lefties last year, a 3-WAR player. I like the veteran that could bring Kobe Mayo under his wing next season, as like you mentioned earlier, as he kind of eases his way into the majors again, and where he probably ends up at first base on this roster. But yeah, if Carlos Santana goes elsewhere and Ryan Mountcastle is moved and you're left without a first baseman and Paul Goldschmidt's there, fine. But yeah, I think unless I think there are some better options out there than Goldschmidt, just because I don't think I'm not buying into a potential bounce back either with him.
The Bird is a Word submitted a lot of interesting moves here, and I'll just start with this one. Juan Soto, 14 years, $650 million. You would do that, right?
Yeah, but I don't think he's coming to Baltimore. I think it's like a 5% chance at best, but I'm giving him whatever the hell he wants if he is going to come to Baltimore.
Pete Alonso, 5 years, $130 million.
No. The power's massive, sure. I think I actually looked at his hit chart if you overlay it onto Oriole Park, and he only loses like 1 home run, I think it was. I looked at it like 2 weeks ago, so I don't remember. The power is very real, but And this is first baseman who's not very good defensively, has no speed, doesn't walk much, doesn't really get on base. Meh. That's for somebody else, I think.
Yeah, I'd rather have Christian Walker for probably less than that. Heston Kjerstad plus prospects for Garrett Crochet. Now, here's where Bob's research comes in again, using the trade simulator. Kjerstad, Dylan Beavers, Chase McDermott for Crochet actually is pretty much an even trade. So let's use that as our starting point. Heston Kjerstad, Dylan Beavers, and Chase McDermott for Garrett Crochet. Would you do that trade?
I'm driving them to Chicago myself. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you bring in Teoscar Hernandez, bring in Tyler O'Neill. There are the right field options you can bring in to replace Santander and Heston Kjerstad. If Kjerstad's moved in deal, Beavers, I like him. I love the work that he's done, specifically offensively, as he's gone up the ladder. I think he kind of stalled out a little bit this year in Double-A. You've got Enrique Bradfield Jr. there. You've got Judge Fabian still there. You've got plenty of outfield depth in the minors. And Chase McDermott, I think, can be a really, really solid bullpen arm for you and potentially a starter. I think, this is DL Hall territory again, but Garrett Crochet, I mean, you bring him in now. I'd love to get him in as early as possible. Bring him in early, put him on your plan, and hope he stays healthy for a full season. Steamer's projecting him at 170 innings next year and a 5-WAR pitcher. This is the lefty, and I think that price is take that website for what it's worth, man. But if that's the deal to get Crochet, absolutely, I'm doing that deal.
Yeah, I'm doing that trade too. And I know that there's a lot of skepticism around Crochet because of the lack of track record before his big year last year. And I don't know, some people were maybe turned off too by his reported deadline demand of getting an extension for any team that acquired him, or he would sit out the postseason. Take that for what it's worth. But I feel like that if you could get Crochet for that price, as you said, at this early stage in his career, he's only 26. He's not going to be a free agent for 2 more years. You're bringing him in at a point where he could get used to this pitching program, and if things are working out, decides he wants to stick around longer, I would absolutely do it. And let's face it, as much as I love the 3 players that you'd be giving up in that deal, none of them are slam dunks. So, yes, I would do that trade.
Yeah. No, I mean, Kjerstad, how many at-bats in Major League Baseball does Kjerstad have? I'm sure this organization would love for him to have naturally taken over the Santander role by now. There'd be no question about that, but we still haven't seen it. It is what it is. Dylan Beavers, is he a bona fide right fielder for you at the next level, or left fielder? He's a pretty athletic guy. Is he a bona fide starting outfielder for you at the Major League level? Again, there are other outfielders down there on the farm who I think have much higher odds, to be completely honest. And McDermott, like I said, he's a wild card. He could be an explosive piece for you out of the bullpen this year. Or maybe he could take control and be a number 4 or 5 starter for you this year in the rotation. But he's a very risky prospect as well. Crochet, he's 25 years old? Was a 5-WAR pitcher this year, projecting to be that plus more next year. I'm down. Let's do it.
One more from Bird is a word here. Find Mountcastle plus prospects for Mariners arm. We don't have a specific one there assigned, but I would think that the price tag would be different if we're talking about Bryce Miller versus George Kirby versus Luis Castillo. So there's some nuance here, but either way, you're opening up a deal with the Mariners. You're starting with Ryan Mountcastle plus some prospects to get one of their bigger arms. Would you do that?
I mean, I'd love to. I don't. If I'm Seattle, I'm not trading Gilbert or Kirby. And honestly, I'm not trading Bryce Miller either. I'd trade Brian Wu maybe, but I'm not moving those guys, especially for Ryan Mountcastle. If there's some sort of deal you can work out with Luis Castillo, you want to take that deal on, sure. But I don't know. It's fun to think about a deal with the Mariners because they have so many arms. I love this rotation. And it's very clear that if they could use a lot of help with their lineup, and they have a ton of arms that they could really bolster that lineup with. But I'm not putting much hope into a deal with Seattle coming to fruition this offseason.
Yeah, my feeling when I look at this, proposal is that from the Orioles side, yes, I probably would want to make a move with the Mariners, and I think that this would be a reasonable starting place. But Ryan Mountcastle, this is not a good fit for the Mariners. If he can't hit in Baltimore, he's probably not going to hit in Seattle. And honestly, if I'm the Mariners, and I don't know they're going to move this way, but I'm trying to bolster through free agency. I'm not moving my starters to try to improve my lineup when you've got a rotation that could get you deep into the postseason. If you could assemble anything resembling a league average lineup there. So take the chance that Julio Rodriguez bounces back, bring in Tyler O'Neill or somebody else, look for a lefty bat to fill in there. But I'm looking for ways other than giving up Logan Gilbert or George Kirby or Luis Castillo to improve my lineup. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and bring us home here with this move from Brady Jones.
Yes. Brady Jones, shout out Brady. He says Ryan Mountcastle, again, a lot of Ryan Mountcastle moves. Ryan Mountcastle plus Juan Nunez plus another prospect for Cardinals reliever Ryan Helsley. And again, Bob shouting out the Trade Values website here has Mountcastle and Nunez at 6.2 value, and the third piece would probably have to be Dylan Beavers or Judd Fabian to equal Helsley's 14 value, according to Baseball Trade Values. So Ryan Mountcastle, Juan Nunez, and either Beavers or Fabian for Helsley.
I would not do that because although I don't think it would hurt for the Orioles to add bullpen depth, they don't need to be moving at the top of the market, and Helsley would certainly be towards the top of the trade market for relievers this offseason. The one thing that I think is kind of getting lost in a lot of the offseason coverage nationally, where I'm seeing relievers who are in that first or second tier projected to the Orioles, is you have Felix Bautista coming back. And even if Felix Bautista is not 100% from day one, Felix Bautista's 90% is better than 100% of whatever Craig Kimbrell was last year, or 95% of Sir Anthony Dominguez most nights. So I would rather find a waiver claim or two, or bring along Colin Selby, see if you can develop him, get a solid 7th, 8th inning guy who can maybe step up and do more for you if Bautista isn't ready to go on day one. But I just don't think that the Orioles need to be in this tier of the market to improve their bullpen.
Yeah, I don't hate the deal. I do agree with your points there. I don't hate it. My thing is, though, the inclusion of Juan Nunez, I thought I was hoping it wasn't Tommy John surgery, and apparently it wasn't. It was a shoulder issue, but he pretty much didn't pitch at all this year. I think he had 30 innings or so, and then they shut him down. He never came back. So from the Cardinals' perspective, I don't know. Do you trust that Juan Nunez is healthy? But I will say, the inclusion of Juan Nunez in this deal, I think is smart. The idea is certainly smart because Nunez, I don't know if we talk about him enough. He might arguably have some of the best stuff in this organization. If you want to tell me he's a top 10 prospect in this organization, I wouldn't fight back at all. I don't know if I agree, but I do think he is one of the more slept on pitching prospects in the system. Yeah, he's on the smaller side. Yeah, he walks a lot of guys, more guys than he should, but he's still a young arm. He's also, as we're going to talk about in a moment, Rule 5 eligible. And so I think he's on that list of guys who probably is potentially traded because unless he's going to take some massive jump forward in 2025 and be ready to go in 2026 in the big leagues, I think is a guy that is probably a Trey McGough type situation next year, although you're probably going to get more for Juan Nunez than you did Trey McGough. But yeah, I like the trade idea, but yeah, I don't know if St. Louis does this. If I'm the Orioles, maybe, but yeah, no, I think I'll pass on this one as well.
Well, a lot of thought-provoking moves there from our listeners. Thank you for submitting those, and keep an eye out throughout the offseason. We will be having mailbag episodes, and we certainly welcome listener questions, not just for those, but for any of our episodes, including from our live viewers. That does it for this episode. We will be back later this week, though, with a look at the looming Rule 5 deadline, which is next week. We're going to discuss who the Orioles will and won't protect with a 40-man roster spot as that date approaches. You're not going to want to miss that. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels. And for right now, I don't think that includes Blue Sky. Maybe it will in the future. We'll see. But in the meantime, you can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to Patreon and sign up to become a member of our Patreon community. We will have bonus coverage there throughout the offseason. And if you are a current Patreon member, think about gifting a subscription this holiday season to the baseball fan that you know that just can't get enough Orioles prospect coverage. Patreon is rolling out gift subscriptions this offseason. You can check that out over at our Patreon to learn a little bit more about that. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network.
Between bad calls and intense rivalries, there's enough to stress about on game day. Keep your mind on the field and off your body odor with Dove Men Plus Care Whole Body Deodorant. Available at Walmart. Dove Men Whole Body Deo provides all-day odor protection from your pits, privates to feed. From pregame analysis to halftime insights to unexpected overtimes, Dove Men Whole Body Deo gives you confidence that lasts all day. Pick it up at your local Walmart.
My hospital stay would have cost $25,000, but with VA healthcare, it's free.
My education would have cost $42,000, but with VA benefits, my books, tuition, and housing are all covered.
The down payment for my home would have been $74,000, but with my VA home loan, my down payment was $0. My service was then. My benefits are now. Get what you earned. Visit choose.va.gov.
Not all veterans are eligible for the type or amount of benefits mentioned here.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.